All right, hello fellow roguelikers. I'm super excited to be here. I'm going to tell you a story about the inspiration that took me on a whirlwind adventure to realize and discover my own personal holy grail of roguelike graphics. Once I figure out how to advance the slide. There we go. So this talk is going to come in two parts. I'm going to tell you about the journey in making Incendian Falls and its graphics layer Domino. And then I'm going to tell you about the benefits of ASCII, Sprites, and the Symbolic approach. So I hope you come away with a new appreciation of ASCII, Sprites, and how much more there is to explore. So a little bit about me. I make programming languages and roguelike things, and I think the most important thing to know about me is that I am not an artist. I am terrible at art. Ironically, this is a talk about art, so take everything I say with a huge grain of salt, an asteroid of salt, a comet of salt, a salt comet. So with my art skills, I was naturally drawn to developing roguelikes. ASCII was the perfect medium for me. Life was great. And then I saw this on the ADOM site, and I'm like, whoa, dude, what is this? Is this like some sort of like new ADOM 4.0 kind of thing? Like, this is cool. You can do ASCII in 3D. That's amazing. And I was inspired. Like, I had to try making something like this. So I hacked together a program that would generate some 3D character meshes, and eventually I had something like this. Now, don't be distracted by the pentagonal tiling and the elevation. That's a talk for next year. But look at the little the @ sign that's jumping around. That's a 3D @ sign. And it's got a little shadow. It looks pretty neat. But I could tell, like, something was missing. And years later, it occurred to me that I could put it on a little domino tile thingy, and it actually kind of looked really good. And of course, with any new graphics project, you had to add particle systems, right? Got to add a fire effect. You can't just not add a fire effect. But something was still wrong. The ASCII didn't seem to fit somehow with everything around it. And I was thinking maybe I could use Unicode characters, and that actually kind of worked. Like, there was something about Unicode characters that at least I'm not familiar with that kind of worked with the rest of the tiles. And then I was thinking, what if I went full symbolic, and then an ominous thunder boomed in the distance? So I found a font editing program called Bird Font, and I traced this fancy-looking D. It might sound like it's hard to trace fonts and, add curves and stuff, but it's actually just the pen tool like any regular graphics program. The symbol took less than a minute to trace. I'm going to pause for a bit and let that sink in. It took less than a minute to trace that really pretty symbol, and I am not an artist. So I hope you can see the implications of something like this. And it actually worked really well. It really seemed to fit with the rest of the tiles. And then my friend Kevin Navarro made a tool called Glyph, which could generate way better meshes than the tool I hacked together, and it gave us outline meshes. So the left, yes, your left as well. On the left is without meshes, without outline meshes, and on the right is with outline meshes, and it turned out really well. So let's give a hand to Kevin, actually. Like, his outlines made this work. It was ready, so we named it Domino. And then in the 7DRL, I used Domino to make this game called Incendian Falls, where you can time travel to work with your past self in combat. My favorite part was on Thursday, when I'd found a nice set of icons that I was allowed to trace, and I brought them into the game in under 30 minutes. I had somehow taken the most frustrating, challenging thing about game development for me, artwork, and reduced it to just a half hour of tracing. It was almost as pretty as Sprites, and it was almost as easy as ASCII. So let's take a step back now and put this in context. I think we found just the tip of the iceberg. Domino is just one approach. What if there are other ways to combine the good parts of ASCII and Sprites? To show you what I mean, let's talk about what makes ASCII great, what makes Sprite great, and I'll talk about where Domino does well and where it falls flat. Let's decompose what's good about each of these, and maybe we can figure out new ways to combine things into something even better. I think the 7 most important differences are the learning curve, the beauty, how it can evoke imagination, the clarity of what you're presenting, how much information you can present, design efficiency, which is like how fast you can bring a new graphic into the game, and the reusability of those graphics. So with the learning curve, there's obviously 3 demons at a table, there's a stool over there, there's some person in a bed. Like, you can tell that just by looking, and that's really the power of Sprites. But with ASCII, as much as I love ASCII, we have to learn what these letters mean. What's the T? What are those quote things? Are they friends? Are they enemies? Are they objects? Are they food? Can I eat them? We don't really know. And you've all seen it. Most people look at roguelikes and just see noise. They don't know what they're looking at, and it's intimidating. ASCII requires you to learn before you can have fun. Of course, once you learn it, ASCII is amazing. But until you get to that point, it's kind of hard to play. I think Domino landed somewhere between ASCII and Sprites on learning. A claw doesn't really tell you that something's a goblin, but it also doesn't require you to learn before you can play. All you need to know as a player is that It's scary, it's an enemy, life goes on. So let's talk about the beauty aspect. Sprites are beautiful. Just look at Tangle Deep. It is one of the most beautiful games I've ever seen. But not all sprites are beautiful. Without an artist, you'll be using sprite sheets, and eventually your sprite sheet won't have something you want, and reaching for other sprite sheets is kind of dangerous because their art styles will clash and look like this. Let's not forget, ASCII can be really beautiful too. Brogue did an amazing job with their artwork. And I gotta mention Cogmine, which supports ASCII with beautiful colors and animations. The beauty of ASCII will probably never catch up to sprites, but wow, like Brogue and Cogbind get really close. In my personal opinion, Domino looks almost as good as sprites, and especially considering my art skills, I think it did pretty well here. So in the imagination, ASCII games rely on your imagination, which is way better than any graphics card. I think there's some nuance here though. Just switching to ASCII isn't enough to evoke imagination. I don't feel it as much in randomly generated levels as much as, say, this town Torino, or the Tower of Eternal Flames, where the floor and wall colors flicker to hint at waving fire. I think switching to ASCII is the first step, but I think one has to give a tiny bit of extra detail, like just enough to trigger imagination. Also, with ASCII, I can throw in an orange M called an ambling shambler, and I've evoked a different image in each of your minds, and I think there's power in that. In Incendian Falls, no symbol tried to look like what it is. For example, the goblin symbol doesn't look like a goblin, it's a claw, hopefully just enough to trigger imagination. But stepping back, I'm not actually sure it works quite yet. I suspect there's too much distracting detail and color for the imagination to really kick in. Hopefully someone here can tell me what the secret sauce is for evoking imagination and we can figure out how to bring it into Domino. Let's talk about clarity. These two images show the exact same situation. On the right, you can see that sprites are beautiful, and on the left, you can see that ASCII gives you a much more accurate picture of the situation. It's a lot easier to tell what's going on just looking at the ASCII. And since Domino was symbols, and they didn't have to be humanoid, that let me focus on the distinguishing characteristics of each creature. I think that it made it much clearer what was going on in a given scene. And look in the center of the level where the stairs are. Objects like stairs, trees, tables, chairs, and so on, they're not backed by a domino, and that makes it easier to, at a glance, figure out, okay, what do I actually have to pay attention to in this scene? What is an enemy? What am I scared of, right? I think Domino did pretty well here, although I do suspect that the heights of the dominoes and the pentagonal terrain kind of sacrificed some clarity for beauty. So let's talk about the information. Here you can see that two of the characters are holding swords, they're readying sword attacks, and one of the characters here is using a gun, right? You can't really show that kind of detail with ASCII. In Domino, these little symbols above the characters, they sacrifice a little bit of clarity, but they show that extra information. And I saved the most important two aspects for last. With ASCII, when I throw in my ambling shambler, I don't need to draw it in 20 different poses like I would with a sprite. I just type in the ASCII code and a color, and I'm done. And with ASCII, you don't have to spend time thinking about whether the art fits with the rest of your game, it just kind of does. I think Domino really shined here. It takes very little time to bring a new symbol into the game. Design efficiency is super important for roguelikes. If we can get graphics out of the way, we can focus more time on what makes roguelikes really great, gameplay and storyline, and other things, of course. Let's talk about reusability. When I make a goblin sprite, I can't really reuse it for much. It's a goblin, and changing the color is kind of harder than you think. But we can reuse symbols with different colors all day long. We could have a light blue claw on a dark blue background, an orange claw on a red background, anything we want. ASCII is also super reusable. We can reuse any letter with any color, any background color, all day long, right? For example, a green O is an orc, purple O is an orc chieftain, and so on. I think this is also incredibly important. The more we can reuse our symbols, the more time we can spend on the important things like gameplay and story. So those are the 7 main differences between these graphical schemes. I think Domino found a really nice balance, but I'm sure there's many other local maxima out there that we can discover. There's a lot more I could talk about, like all these things, so feel free to ask me now or at lunch later today online. That's the end of my talk. I hope you all enjoyed it and are inspired to make the next generation of interesting-looking roguelikes. Thank you, and enjoy the rest of the celebration.
Cool. We have time for a question or two if you want to take questions.
Sure.
I gotta ask about that tiling pattern. Show that again. That's beautiful.
Sure. Let me find it. Let me find a really nice one. Yeah, there we go.
Yes, non-periodic. Is it? I mean, what is it?
That's a good question. This is pentagonal pattern number 9. It turns out there's like 13 or 14 different ways you can tile pentagons as long as they're not perfect sides are all equal pentagons. And it turns out you can actually generalize any repeating group of polygons like this, as long as you can find a group that tiles with them. I can't really show it with the mouse that easily, but there's certain repeating groups of 8 pentagons. And yeah, 8 pentagons. And that group tiles in a 2D fashion, and inside that group of 8, you can identify which tile in the 8. And it turns out with that pattern, you can use a ton of combinations of different polygons.
Okay, so it is a repeating pattern. So
Definitely, a repeating pattern, yeah.
what data structure did you use to put that together? Is it a standard graph or something?
Yeah, standard graph. It was a data structure. It was a hash map of a tuple of 3 integers, group X, group Y, and indexing group. And then the value of that hash map was the tile itself.
Cool. We have time for maybe one more question. Great. And then do you want to set up your computer while we do this question?
Hi. Have you considered using audio to combine with your iconography?
Well, there was audio in Incendian Falls. There was just basic, like, sword sounds, spear sounds, if swords and spears make sounds. But nothing past that. Do you have any interesting ideas there? What? One sound per glyph. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I can imagine using that, such as, like, when a certain goblin comes onto the screen for the first time, you play a sound to draw attention to that. That's a good idea. Let's talk. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much.